With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halverson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, RaboResearch reports a slowdown of the global walnut market. But to start off today, the House version of the Farm Bill has been scored. As Todd Gleason reports, the projected 10-year costs provide some transparency as to how the legislation, if enacted, might reallocate the nation's feeding programs and farm supports.
Earlier this year, the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Agriculture reported out a new farm bill. The Congressional Budget Office, or the CBO, has now scored it. Jonathan Kappas, agricultural economist from the University of Illinois, is here to discuss what that means. Thank you, Jonathan, for taking some time. Can you walk me through the House Farm Bill and the scoring process, please?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have to always keep in mind, which is one of these wonderful oddities of the reauthorization and legislative process, is the primary role that the Congressional Budget Office plays, because they are the nonpartisan, unaffiliated experts on the economic questions, and they're the scorekeeper. They're the official scorekeeper of how much programs are expected to spend, and they score this, they project these out over 10 years into the future, which is confusing and challenging in many ways. But it is the method that Congress has put in place for itself. It's the way it's trying to, it's the rules it's supposed to operate by when it comes to legislating and enacting laws. The other thing that the CBO scoring process does, and one of the more positive things, is a bit of transparency, right? It is non-partisan, objective analysis of what the changes in the legislation would be expected to do, what kind of projections you get out of those changes. The CBO's analysis adds a lot of transparency to that, because it kind of gives you a sense of, by changing that, it's going to cost, a certain amount.
Tell me about the different parts of the Farm Bill and then what the House has done in the way it's structuring it.
Well, so as we know, farm bills get passed through this coalition that helps get the votes to move the legislation through Congress. And that coalition involves three things. That is the support to farmers through Title I commodity programs like agricultural risk coverage and price loss coverage. That is helping farmers manage risk through the crop insurance program. That is helping farmers deal with conservation and natural resource challenges. And probably most importantly, overall, in terms of getting a bill through Congress, SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And so that is a big program, serves over 40 million Americans every month. And what we've seen the last two farm bills is that when that comes under partisan attack to try to cut the spending in that program, it tears apart the coalition and makes it nearly impossible to move a bill. And so CBO clarified that the House Farm Bill kind of takes this difficult and troubled route for the third straight time in the House now, where it's looking to cut about, in total, $20 billion from the SNAP program. And then on the other side of the ledger, it's increasing farm program payments by CBO's estimate by $43 billion over 10 years. And so really big shifts that on their own would be really problematic, but when combined, are pretty much the end of trying to get this bill through.
What are the shifts on the farm side? So in the ARC and the PLC program, the crop insurance program in particular.
Yeah, so one of the key things, right, that it's a negotiation, and should anything happen between now and the lame duck, we're going to have to work out, or Congress is going to have to work out kind of these major sticking points. So most of the spending in the commodities programs is through increasing reference prices in the price loss coverage program. So that's increasing that threshold that triggers payments. There's a small, and that's about $35 billion in additional costs. There's about $9 to $10 billion increased in the agriculture risk coverage. So the House is moving up the guarantee and expanding the coverage level. Then there's about $3.5 billion for crop insurance. That's split between increasing the administrative and operating subsidies for the companies and agents that do the private side of the public-private insurance program. And then there's an increase to the supplemental coverage option, so that they're moving it to a 90% trigger with an 80% subsidy on it. And so that also is projected to score about half of that $3.6 billion.
Are there winners and losers within that? For instance, if I recall correctly, and I believe the last two farm bills have done this, certainly the 2018 bill, those in the Northwestern Corn Belt have not done as well under the farm bill as others. Those in the South have done better.
Well, there's been a long-running regional imbalance in the way these programs are designed. So I want to be clear, the CBO score doesn't break down commodity by commodity. What we have are the top line big, 10-year estimates. But what we know in terms of how the programs operate, increasing reference prices to the degree the House does. So those are large increases for base acres that are affiliated with rice, cotton, seed cotton, and peanuts in particular. Those are only grown in the South. Those base acres are only in the South. And so what we've seen is a disproportionate increase for the reference prices for those crops. So we would assume that out of these increased spending numbers from CBO, that the farmers who hold base acres, and remember, these are not payments on what's planted. They can get paid for rice and plant another crop, which is why I think this gets to be controversial amongst farmers, is it's not just we're paying Southern farmers, it's that they're getting paid oftentimes to plant the same soybeans and corn crops that we're planting up here in Illinois. So that's where some of this challenge comes in. But you are correct. What we have analyzed previously and continue to dig into, but is not in the CBO score, is this regional disparity or this imbalance in which we're increasing the price thresholds for some of these for these southern crops in particular, and that's going to increase payments there, and so we're going to see more of those funds in that region. What gets a little bit tricky is that corn, for example, has a lot of base acres in the program, so it looks like corn gets will end up getting most of the payments, but if you look at it on a per base acre level, right, we're talking 94 million acres of base acres of corn compared to 4.5 million base acres of rice. But on a per base acre payment rate, what we've done previously, our estimates are quite a bit of an increase on rice and peanuts and seed cotton, with I think peanuts as much as $255 per base acre.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's I guess one more step in a process that seems to be having more than its fair share of challenges.
Jonathan Koppes is an agricultural policy specialist with the Farm Doc team here on the Urbana-Champaign campus of the University of Illinois. I'm Todd Gleason.
In today's National Spotlight, a U.S. organic regulation change is causing challenges for Canadian organic suppliers. Dennis Guy reports.
A USDA regulation change is intended to protect the integrity of organic food in America, and while the Canadian Organic Trade Association applauds any effort to improve that industry, its executive director says the new program has bottlenecks and that implementation timelines are causing problems for the Canadian organic industry. The new USDA rules began in May and are scheduled for complete enforcement by September, just 1 month from now. The new rules require the USDA's National Organic Program certification be enforced for all organic imports, and certification as well is required by all businesses involved within the supply chain. However, the final step in the commercial supply chain, the American retailer, does not have to be certified under the new rules. And according to Tia Lofsgaard, executive director of the Canadian Organic Trade Association, that anomaly is proving to be a real problem.
Canadian who used to be able to sell to a non-certified retailer will now not be able to sell direct to that retailer. The issue is retailers do not require certification because all they're doing is putting products on a shelf. But the regulation has changed that you cannot export to a non-certified entity in the United States.
All organic products imported into the U.S. must be certified under the National Organic Program. So, unless an American organic retailer wants to apply for program certification to receive any Canadian organic product, the responsibility is with the Canadian company to work within the new framework. Tia Lofsgaard of the Canadian Organic Trade Association says many companies that have built their business by shipping directly to U.S. retail retail outlets are now running into a trade roadblock. So, to get around that roadblock, Lofsgaard says some Canadian companies are opening an American office to receive their own goods from across the border in order to comply with the rules.
Canadians are realizing, wow, we've been shipping direct to these retailers for 15, 20 years. Now they have to get an import certificate. When it comes to the end retailer, there's no need for them to get certified as an importer. So Canadians are having to become their own importer of record. We're realizing how many Canadian companies are actually working on both sides of the border. So they're an exporter, but they're also the importer of record.
The Canadian Organic Trade Association has requested the full compliance date for the National Organic Program be postponed from September until May of next year. That date would then allow a full year from date of notice to implement the necessary business changes. Reporting from Canada, I'm Dennis Guy.
That's today's National Spotlight. Now here's the Livestock Report. Introducing new products to overseas customers is a great way to draw attention to differentiate U.S. pork from pork of other origins. Courtney Knupp, Vice President of International Market Development for the National Pork Board, shares how consumer preference research leads to product innovations in key markets like Mexico.
New product activation, as well as just teaching people new technical expertise about how to use pork as a product in general, is part of the value proposition of investing in trade promotion and having boots on the ground in our team with U.S. Meat Export Federation. And this team has been working on a pork jerky that's made 100% of U.S. ham, and it's called a carne snack. It's a pretty economical option for snackers on the go. It's going to be available in over 22,000 store locations across Mexico.
In-market activation and demonstrations add more value for importers of U.S. pork, she says.
Just the trade servicing promotion of how to teach them from merchandising and fabrication of the carcass, those are all things that we're doing across the supply chain to supplant our loyalty with our customers, but also give them new value beyond price for their businesses.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. Don't forget, if you've missed any of our morning shows or if you simply need to catch the news at a different time, you can subscribe to our podcast and have statewide agriculture news at your convenience. All you have to do is search for the AgNet News Hour on your favorite podcast downloading app. That's AgNet News Hour, and it's available wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Coming up in a few moments, we'll have today's This Land of Ours report, but first, more of the day's agriculture news. And with a preview of what you'll hear today on AgNet West, here's Brian German.
A recent report from RaboResearch highlights several challenges impacting the global walnut market. Some of the issues the industry is working to navigate includes drought and water regulations, along with rising costs and weaker prices. Producers are reducing acreage, especially in less competitive areas with water constraints. The focus is on improving efficiency and quality to balance supply and demand. The report notes that major walnut producers like China, the U.S., Chile, and the EU have dominated production. However, production expansion is slowing due to economic and environmental pressures. While prices are recovering, they remain below break-even in some regions. China is the largest producer and consumer of walnuts and will also continue being a key exporter, with production outpacing consumption. Global exports have grown significantly but are expected to slow from Chile and China, while the U.S. is expected to maintain its market share. The American Farmland Trust has launched a new bilingual toolkit to help new and retiring farmers navigate land transfers. As nearly 300 million acres of farmland are set to change hands in the coming decades, this new land transfer training resource addresses the challenges both parties face during these transitions. The toolkit, available at farmland.org, includes training plans, worksheets, case studies, and more, all available in English and Spanish. It's designed to help farmers and ranchers build the necessary skills and relationships to manage the complex process of transferring land, whether within a family or to an unrelated party. The curriculum covers topics like finances, legal tools, and negotiation. AFT emphasizes the importance of adapting to each unique situation and continues to refine the resources based on feedback from agricultural service providers. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has announced significant updates to the farm loan programs from the Farm Service Agency. The changes will take effect beginning on September 25th and will be designed to help farmers and ranchers become more financially stable. The updates are part of the new rule enhancing program access and delivery for farm loans and include three main changes. First, FSA is offering a new program where financially struggling farmers can delay one farm payment per year at a lower interest rate. Second, FSA is allowing more flexible repayment terms to help farmers make more money and save up. Additionally, FSA is reducing the amount of collateral needed for direct farm loans so farmers don't have to put up as much property to get a loan. These updates are designed to give farmers more financial freedom and reduce stress, especially for new and beginning farmers. The USDA is also adding online tools to make applying for and paying back loans easier and faster. The Department of Water Resources just released a report showing that California's water supply could drop by 23% in the next 20 years due to climate change. DWR's 2023 State Water Project Delivery Capability Report notes that the decline in water supplies would amount to about 496,000 acre-feet of water annually, enough for 1.7 million homes. It highlights the need for significant updates to the State Water Project, which was built in the 1960s. The report points to projects like the Delta Conveyance and Sites Reservoir as essential to bolstering water supplies. It also includes new methods for analyzing climate impacts and stresses the need for a varied approach to water management, such as groundwater recharge, desalination, recycling, and conservation. The California Rice Field Day is scheduled for Wednesday, August 28th at the Rice Experiment Station in Biggs. Sponsored by the California Cooperative Rice Research Foundation and University of California, the Rice Field Day is aimed at providing rice growers and others an opportunity to observe and discuss research in progress at the Rice Experiment Station. Registration and poster viewing will begin at 7:30, with a general session set to begin at 8:30 consisting of the CCRRF annual membership meeting, Rice Research Trust report, and the presentation of the California Rice Industry Award. Field tours will begin at 9:20 and will rotate between a main station tour and a Hamilton Road Weed Science tour. The program is scheduled to conclude at noon. More information about the field day is available on the upcoming events page at agnetwest.com. I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
You can now apply to be on the Climate Solution Act Advisory Committee. That's coming up on This Land of Ours.
Making the connection between farmers and providers and verifiers of carbon credits.
We announced the opening of positions on an advisory committee that we're instructed to develop under the Climate Solutions Act that was passed by Congress. It's a large advisory committee.
32 members, according to Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. Speaking at the American Coalition for Ethanol Conference in Omaha, Nebraska Thursday, he explained the committee will review qualifications and activities of technical assistance providers and third-party carbon credit verifiers and advise the Secretary on method, entry, and integrity of carbon markets. Applications are being accepted through the Federal Register, with the deadline for application October 15th. More information about the committee is available online. I'm Ron Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Changes take effect next month within the Farm Service Agency's farm loan programs, changes designed to improve borrower financial flexibility. Rod Bain looks at these proposed changes in this edition of Agriculture USA.
A new way of doing business through USDA Farm Service Agency farm loan programs, and in turn, increase flexibility and resiliency for ag producers.
We think that these changes to the terms are really transformative.
FSA Administrator Zach Ducheneau recently made the announcement of changes with the farm loan programs scheduled to take effect in late September. How might these changes not only benefit borrowers, but also farm operations and personal finances? I'm Ron Bain. And coming up, a look at new aspects of Farm Service Agency farm loan programs in this edition of Agriculture USA. When the Farm Service Agency considered improvements within its farm loan programs, improvements benefiting borrowers via greater economic flexibility and resiliency, Agency Administrator Zach Ducheneau says it was a deep analytic dive of FSA staff that led to this epiphany.
When we get into loan servicing, we are almost always able to work things out. And in our primary loan servicing, we really open the book on flexibility in terms that work for the producer to help them meet their actual needs. But kind of got us to thinking, what if we did that at the beginning of the relationship? And what if we further demonstrated that when credit meets the actual needs of a producer, everybody's successful, programs are successful, everybody's farmers profitable.
With that, a new rule scheduled to take effect September 25th focuses on changes within farm loan programs. The administrator says 4 key objectives are behind these changes.
First, provide financial freedom to our producers. Next is expand opportunities for our producers. Next is to increase resilience in their operation. And last is to provide equitable access to our producers.
3 specific changes are emphasized within the Farm Loan Program improvements. First, a new low-interest installment set-aside program for financially distressed borrowers.
What's unique about this particular aspect of our services is you don't need to have a natural disaster to trigger it. It's lower documentation. And when we do set that payment aside, instead of accruing interest at the already established rate, it's going to accrue interest at 0.125%. So we're really setting aside a payment, and it's not going to balloon on you in a way that jeopardizes your operation as you're coming to the end of that term.
Loan security requirements will be reduced to enable borrowers to leverage equity.
Our current percentage of security that we take is up to 150%. So with this rule, we're announcing that not more than 125% security will be taken in any loans that we make. In addition to that, we will offer the opportunity to have our security interest reduced to not more than 125% upon 3 years of payments as agreed on the existing notes.
Another change in farm loan programs is a reduced frequency for borrowers to put up their personal residence as collateral for a loan.
With this rule, if we do not need it to get to a one-to-one security position, we will not take the primary residence as additional security to get there. We're going to put the homestead protection in these transactions at the front end of this instead of waiting till we get to the end and having to rely on bankruptcy protections or other homestead protection acts. We want to make sure that that's off the table because in some of our visits around the country, that's been the biggest stressor for some of our producers.
The administrator says the changes will also improve repayment terms to increase borrower financial flexibility.
We're going to make sure that our staff in Countryside understand that producers should be allowed to build those things into their business plan. Having a retirement fund built into this can help ease that generational transfer and help enable us to recruit young farmers and ranchers back to the farm. Being able to pay for your health insurance from your production income because FSA can make adjustments to our terms to allow for that might be able to help them step out of that job that they've got over there in the town 40 miles away because they need the health insurance. They can pay for that for their family on their own terms. He or she might be able to devote more of that time and attention and innovation to their actual ag operation.
And in the context of greater financial flexibility and resiliency these new and updated provisions in farm loan programs should provide, Administrator Ducheneau observes,
we're really proud of all 3 of these provisions that we've lifted up. Any of them on their own would be a great transformation, but taken as a collective, this really signals a new day in ag finance.
More information about farm loan programs and upcoming changes are available at local FSA offices or online at www.fsa.usda.gov. This has been Agriculture USA. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Soybeans and corn condition ratings have remained amazingly consistent during this growing season. Gary Crawford reports.
Most growing seasons provide us with a lot of suspenseful stories, a lot of drama, but this season, many reporters are faced with this question.
How do we turn no change in condition into an exciting story this week? That's really the bottom line.
USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says for corn and soybeans, if we were lazy, we could almost get away with just running the same pre-recorded stories this week as we did almost a month ago.
And it shows the power of cool weather during the key reproductive to filling stages of development for corn and soybeans. No change in overall condition this week for both crops.
And it's a pretty good condition report for corn.
67% of the crop, good to excellent. 10% very poor to poor.
And for soybeans, 68% of the crop rated good to excellent condition, 8% poor to very poor. And of course, you guessed it.
No change from last week.
Which is a good thing. USDA said Monday it could lead to the 3rd largest corn crop, the biggest soybean harvest ever. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. For the Conservationist of the Year, what goals would you like to see occur this year?
So this is continuing work as the Certified Crop Advisor Conservationist of the Year. They're looking for certified crop advisors who are trying to aid farmers in getting information or conservation practices. One thing we've identified that is keeping farmers from getting conservation practices is actually just information and products. The current federal regulations actually were written in the 1950s. And at that time, those rules were only restricting fertilizers and pesticides. They didn't put into account other developing technologies such as plant biostimulants and some of these newer technologies we're using in agriculture. And so for 2024, our goal is to really help change the laws that are impacting biostimulant regulation to allow them to be used and treated as a fertilizer, not as a pesticide.
So, what does that process look like to go through that and get that change to be where it needs to be?
Well, actually, there's a very long on-ramp. We've been working on this since 2014, and the bricks that we've laid on this path are now hopefully being included in the Farm Bill. So more than anything now, it's just supporting the work we've already done, trying to get legislators aware of the problem and hopefully enact those rules. There's an act right now by California regulators. It's called the Plant Biostimulant Act. And so the best thing that farmers can do is call up and say, hey, we support this language. This is going to give us more tools to enact those conservation practices and have more products available to us.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com. Don't forget, if you've missed any of our morning shows or if you simply need to catch the news at a different time, you can subscribe to our podcast and have statewide agriculture news at your convenience. Just search for the AgNet News Hour on your favorite podcast downloading app. We'll be right back. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. The American Coalition for Ethanol, or ACE, had its 37th annual convention last week in Nebraska. In his opening remarks, CEO Brian Jennings discussed the goal of nationwide year-round E15 and making more affordable ethanol blends available in places like California where the fuel prices are high. Here are some of his opening remarks.
We have some old business to tackle relative to E15 and the renewable fuel standard. So, with respect to E15, at long last, thanks to the incredible grassroots leadership of many people in this room, year-round access is a reality for 8 Midwest states, including Nebraska. The opt-outs from key Corn Belt governors, combined with summertime waivers, emergency waivers for E15 in conventional gasoline areas, the third consecutive year EPA has invoked this emergency authority, I would add, should help set the stage for coast-to-coast availability. While we encourage other states to consider opt-outs of their own, follow the lead of Nebraska and others, ultimately we need Congress to step in and ensure permanent nationwide access to E15. In this election year, there are a finite number of congressional days or legislative days on the congressional calendar. But rest assured, we are working very closely with our champions in Congress, Republican and Democratic alike, and we're optimistic about the opportunity to get E15 legislation across the finish line before the end of the year. So, what about the renewable fuel standard? Well, after years of mismanagement under both Democratic and Republican administrations, for the most part, the RFS has been on track. There is less day-to-day conflict with refiners over annual blending obligations, and that's because the last time EPA set targets, they have been set through calendar year 2025. But the RFS skirmishes with refiners continue. I can assure you of that, unfortunately. They've simply shifted to the courtroom. Late last month, the D.C. Circuit Court decided to send the small refinery exemption denials by the Biden EPA back to the agency for further review. The court is essentially requiring EPA to reassess every single denial based on each refinery's unique circumstances. That's going to take some time. It's also a reminder that our defense of the RFS is literally never ending. So we will remain vigilant to protect the integrity of the renewable fuel standard, and we will engage a new administration in 2025 to set volumes for 2026 and beyond. Now, speaking of the future, the inescapable reality is that elected officials at global, at national, and at state levels are standing up policies to decarbonize various sectors of the economy. And for our industry, this means the use of high carbon intensity fuels will begin to fade. But the use of low carbon fuels should increase. While elections can and will have consequences for these policies, perhaps even slowing their momentum, make no mistake, the decarbonization momentum will not be stopped. To future-proof our industry, steps must be taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's precisely what ethanol producers have been doing: optimizing, innovating, becoming more efficient. And during this time, ACE has tackled the other half of the carbon intensity equation, which is how ethanol companies can further reduce greenhouse gas emissions based on farming practices. Our goal to make corn ethanol the undisputed gold standard clean fuel of the future. Now, agriculture is part of ACE's DNA. We were founded by farmers. Farmers continue to make up a significant part of our organization today. So we are in a unique position to set the standard. And that is why the United States Department of Agriculture has entrusted us to lead projects, initiatives ultimately designed to help ethanol producers and farmers unlock new market opportunities through climate-smart agriculture. It started in the fall of 2021 when USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service awarded funding to ACE to lead a climate-smart ag project through the Regional Conservation Partnership Program in South Dakota. Based on the progress we have made during that time, earlier this year, USDA NRCS invested additional funding for ACE to lead a larger project, expanding our activity to a 10-state region. These initiatives involve many moving pieces and parts, but I'll boil it down to three primary steps. First, we are working with 14 ethanol companies around the Corn Belt to incentivize farmers to adopt climate-smart agriculture practices. Think conservation tillage, nutrient management, cover crops. Second, we are working with soil scientists and the Department of Energy who will measure how the practices adopted by farmers reduce greenhouse gas emissions from corn production, getting that scientific validation. And third, the data we collect, we intend to empower farmers and ethanol producers to capitalize on new market opportunities and tax credits, such as the new 45Z Clean Fuel Production Credit. In the original South Dakota project, we have already incentivized farmers to adopt climate-smart agriculture on 18,000 acres. For the 10-state initiative, we will be able to fund 100,000 additional acres for climate-smart ag. The sites for this larger project were deliberately chosen to provide the Department of Energy with robust data regarding the greenhouse gas benefits of conservation practices in different soil types and climates. Already, more than 500 farmers have attended meetings we have hosted in 7 of the 13 ethanol grain sheds, and those farmers have expressed interest in enrolling nearly 250,000 acres in our project, meaning initial farmer interest is approaching 5 times available funding. So despite the deep concern, the real concern in rural America from farmers about corn prices today, having been to all of these meetings and met with these farmers, I can attest to the fact that farmers are generally very optimistic. They recognize and appreciate what ethanol has done for them in the past, and they are optimistic about selling low-carbon corn to ethanol producers who could benefit from that in the future. Now, once farmers have adopted the practices, the soil samples and other data will be shared with DOE to pressure test the GREET model, which of course is the global gold standard tool for measuring greenhouse gas emissions. It also happens to be what Congress requires of Treasury when it comes to 45Z and non-aviation fuel. The purpose of running our data through GREET is to address the real and perceived information gaps which currently prevent farmers and ethanol producers from monetizing conservation practices in the market. What are these information gaps? Well, let me close by giving you a recent example. Earlier this year, I think everyone knows, Treasury released guidance on the 40B Sustainable Aviation Fuel Tax Credit. While there were positives, for example, the first ever explicit recognition by a government body that certain farming practices have greenhouse gas benefits for biofuels, the requirement to bundle 3 practices, no-till, 4R, nitrogen management, and cover crops on all acres, and the artificial 10-point limit on the credit value of those bundled practices was completely unworkable. Why did Treasury take such a conservative approach to climate-smart agriculture and sustainable aviation fuel? It was because of the perceived and real information gaps about the true greenhouse gas benefits of these practices in different soil types and different climates. The work ACE is doing through our USDA projects will generate the data to solve for these information gaps. We will produce the data to show the carbon benefits of these practices in every region of the Corn Belt. So how can that be of value? Well, with respect to 45Z, our work with USDA will justify more flexibility for farmers, such as credits for standalone practices or stacking of conservation practices without the bundling requirement. Our work will also justify removing artificial caps on the carbon value of these ag practices so farmers and companies can maximize opportunities in the market.
That again from ACE CEO Brian Jennings at the American Coalition for Ethanol Conference. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. The new numbers show that U.S. exports are lower. Gary Crawford has details.
We now have complete U.S. ag trade numbers for the first 9 months of this fiscal year, October through June, and the central theme running through it all:
the continued cooling of U.S. export values, which is really tied to the bulk commodities.
USDA economist Bart Kenner, his latest trade update has overall ag export values down from a year ago, but by only 4%. But if you just look at the major bulk commodities, and those account for about a third of all ag exports, those export values are
down 17% from the previous year.
And here's how export values are running for several of your major bulk products.
U.S. exports of wheat through June 2024 were $4.1 billion, down 17% from the previous year. Corn exports were $10.4 billion, down 6% from the previous year. Soybean exports, $21.2 billion, down 28% from the previous year. And cotton exports were $4.3 billion, down 13% from the previous year.
But Kenner says it's not because crops are not being sold and shipped. For example, in terms of export volume,
corn, which we said was down 6% by value, is actually up 29% by volume.
Wheat shipments are up 10% from a year ago. And so Kenner says it's these low commodity prices doing most of the damage to ag export numbers. That's one reason that U.S. agriculture is running a trade deficit right now with other countries of almost $19 billion and growing. Some say this reflects a weak, non-competitive U.S. ag sector. However, Bart Kenner says
to look at the trade balance and say it's negative, so we're being outcompeted. That's really oversimplifying things. Another thing to consider is a lot of imports are inputs to products that get, value added.
Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halverson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halverson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.